standing alone is a divine strategy. It is a crucible in which character is tested, faith is strengthened, and destiny is confirmed. The pressures, criticisms, and even mockery you face are not meant to discourage you, they are meant to refine you. Just as gold is purified in fire, your spirit is purified in the furnace of solitude and independence. When you stand alone, you encounter a unique clarity of purpose. The distractions of peer pressure, social expectations, and external influences diminish, allowing you to hear the voice of God with unprecedented sharpness. In a world filled with noise and competing voices, solitude becomes a sanctuary where divine instructions can be received and executed with precision. Many people fail to realize that the ability to stand alone requires courage, discipline, and self-awareness. It is not a passive act. It is an active engagement with faith and obedience. You must consciously choose to rely on God's wisdom rather than the counsel of friends, mentors, or even family when those voices contradict the direction God has set before you. This does not mean that community, fellowship, or accountability are unimportant. Rather, it highlights that the ultimate source of strength and guidance must come from God alone. Your independence is a testimony not of arrogance, but of trust. It demonstrates to heaven and earth alike that your faith is not contingent upon human intervention, but upon divine power. Consider the examples of biblical figures who were called to stand alone. Abraham, when he left his homeland and journeyed into an unknown territory, did so with nothing but God's promise. Moses, when confronted with Pharaoh, stood alone before the most powerful ruler of his time, speaking truth and authority with the confidence of God's presence. Daniel, when faced with the lions, refused to compromise, even though he was isolated among enemies. Each of these individuals understood that standing alone was not a punishment, but a calling. They realized that dependence on God alone produced a level of courage, insight, and victory that could not be replicated in the company of men. Standing alone is, therefore, a spiritual advantage. It positions you to act without hesitation, to speak without fear, and to move without compromise. When you are surrounded by voices that echo uncertainty, conformity, or fear, your ability to operate in divine power is diminished. Solitude, independence, and the courage to stand alone remove those impediments and allow God's plan to unfold with clarity and authority. Many believers are trapped in the illusion that companionship, approval, or popularity equates to strength. They fear standing alone because it exposes them to criticism, misunderstanding, or rejection. However, the truth is that reliance on human affirmation is a form of weakness, a subtle surrender to the temporary over the eternal. God never intended for his chosen ones to find their validation in the applause of men. True validation comes from obedience, faithfulness, and alignment with God's will. When you stand alone, you are liberated from the tyranny of public opinion. You no longer have to justify your actions, conform to expectations, or compromise your principles. This freedom, though challenging, is a profound source of strength. It allows you to cultivate an inner confidence that is impervious to external circumstances. The world may misunderstand you, ridicule you, or even oppose you, but your strength remains intact because it is rooted in God, not in human perception. Standing alone requires a mindset of resilience. You must be prepared for trials, tribulations, and temptations that often accompany independence. The enemy knows that when you stand alone, you are closer to the divine, and he will attempt to intimidate, isolate, or distract you. You may face moments of doubt, fear, and uncertainty, but these are precisely the moments that test the depth of your faith. It is easy to follow the crowd. It is easy to conform to popular opinion. It is easy to compromise. But standing alone demands that you maintain integrity, courage, and trust, even when the world appears to be against you. The tests you face while standing alone are not punishments. They are affirmations of your commitment to God's plan. They are opportunities to demonstrate that your faith is not superficial, that your strength is not borrowed, and that your spirit is anchored in divine purpose. Independence in the spiritual sense is not about pride, arrogance, or separation from the body of Christ. It is about responsibility, obedience, and alignment with God's will. It is about understanding that while fellowship and support are valuable, the ultimate measure of your strength is your ability to stand alone when required. This is a critical distinction because many believers confuse independence with isolation. Independence is active engagement with faith and purpose. Isolation is passive withdrawal from community. When God calls you to stand alone, it is a call to engage, to act, and to trust him completely regardless of human support. It is a call to move forward when no one else understands, to speak truth when others remain silent, and to lead when leadership is inconvenient or unpopular. To stand alone is also a statement of identity. It declares that your life is not defined by trends, opinions, or external pressures. It proclaims that your purpose is divinely ordained and not contingent upon the understanding of men. When you stand alone, you reveal the strength of your convictions and the depth of your faith. People may question your decisions, criticize your actions, or misunderstand your motives, but these reactions are inconsequential in comparison to the eternal impact of obedience. Your independence is a beacon, a testimony, and an inspiration. Others may attempt to dissuade you, discourage you, or pull you into conformity, but your ability to stand firm demonstrates the power of God working through a life surrendered to his authority. Moreover, standing alone is an act of spiritual preparation. God uses solitude and independence to cultivate wisdom, clarity, and discernment. When you are not influenced by the whims, fears, or biases of others, you can receive divine insight and direction more clearly. You can make decisions based on God's truth rather than human opinion. You can pursue opportunities aligned with divine purpose rather than popular preference. This clarity is invaluable because it ensures that your actions, words, and influence are rooted in eternal principles rather than temporary circumstances. Those who never learn to stand alone remain vulnerable to manipulation, compromise, and misdirection. They may achieve temporary success, but their influence is limited, their purpose unfulfilled, and their potential constrained. Consider also the spiritual power that comes from standing alone. When you rely solely on God, you tap into an authority that is unmatched by any human source. Your prayers become more fervent, your faith more potent, and your impact more profound. Independence magnifies your spiritual capacity because it removes distractions, doubts, and dependencies that dilute divine power. When you stand alone, you demonstrate that your confidence is not in human resources, but in heavenly provision. Your ability to confront challenges, overcome obstacles, and fulfill your purpose is enhanced exponentially because it is backed by omnipotence rather than limited human ability. The moment you embrace the call to stand alone, you will experience a transformation of identity. You will no longer see yourself as dependent, fearful, or incomplete. Instead, you will recognize the inherent strength, wisdom, and authority bestowed upon you by God. This transformation is not instantaneous. It is a process that requires persistence, prayer, and unwavering faith. You will face moments of isolation, criticism, and doubt, but these are opportunities to strengthen your spiritual muscles, sharpen your discernment, and deepen your trust in God. The more you practice standing alone, the more resilient, confident, and effective you become. Standing alone also cultivates leadership. True leaders are often those who can stand firm in the absence of support, who can make decisions without unanimous approval, and who can act with conviction despite criticism. God positions those who stand alone to lead, influence, and inspire others. Their independence is not a barrier, but a platform from which they can model courage, integrity, and faith. Others will watch, learn, and eventually follow, not because of coercion or popularity, but because of the undeniable power of God manifested through a life that refuses to compromise or conform. Ultimately, standing alone is an expression of faith, obedience, and trust. It is a declaration that you are willing to follow God's instructions, even when the path is lonely, challenging, or misunderstood. It demonstrates that your identity is rooted in divine purpose rather than human approval. It strengthens your character, refines your spirit, and magnifies your influence. Those who learn to stand alone will discover a resilience, clarity, and power that cannot be achieved through dependence on others. Standing alone is not a rejection of community or fellowship. It is a recognition that God's presence is sufficient, God's guidance is infallible, and God's power is unstoppable. The strength revealed in standing alone is unmatched, undeniable, and eternal. Standing alone is not isolation. It is the divine training ground where God shapes your character and destiny. Many believers misunderstand solitude as abandonment, loneliness, or divine neglect, but the truth is far more profound. When God calls you to stand alone, He is not punishing you, He is preparing you. He is using this sacred space to refine your character, sharpen your discernment, and strengthen your spiritual muscles. The training that occurs in solitude is intentional, deliberate, and powerful, designed to equip you for the life purpose and calling He has destined for you. The world may view standing alone as weakness, a sign of failure, or social inadequacy, but in the eyes of God, it is the ultimate sign of trust, obedience, and potential. To stand alone is to embrace the divine methodology, to submit to the unseen process, and to allow God to mold you into someone who can withstand opposition, criticism, and pressure. It is the preparation ground for leadership, influence, and spiritual authority. Many people never reach their full potential because they fear standing alone. They chase the comfort of companionship, the safety of conformity, or the approval of the crowd. Yet, God's plan for extraordinary purpose often requires the courage to walk alone, to endure trials, and to remain faithful in the absence of human support. When you are in the divine training ground of solitude, your weaknesses are exposed. God allows you to see areas where you rely too heavily on others, areas where faith is shallow, and areas where character must be strengthened. These revelations are not meant to discourage, but to awaken. They are opportunities to confront, correct, and cultivate a resilience that is only born in independence. Many believers fail to recognize that the trials of standing alone are transformative. The moments when you feel most vulnerable, misunderstood, or unsupported are the moments when your spiritual capacity is expanding. God uses these circumstances to teach perseverance, courage, and reliance on divine provision rather than human intervention. The process may be uncomfortable, even painful, but it is necessary. The person who never learns to stand alone will never fully experience the power, clarity, and authority that comes from complete dependence on God. The divine training ground is also a place of preparation for destiny. God does not entrust his purpose to those who are unprepared. He does not allow his plan to unfold in the lives of the untested. Standing alone is a form of testing, an assessment of faith, character, and determination. It challenges you to remain steadfast, to act with integrity, and to pursue vision despite obstacles. This is a critical lesson because in the pursuit of greatness, you will encounter situations where support is absent, opposition is strong, and resources are limited. The ability to stand alone in these moments is what separates those who fulfill their God-given destiny from those who compromise, retreat, or conform. Standing alone teaches you that God is your ultimate source of provision, protection, and guidance. He does not require the validation, assistance, or understanding of men to accomplish his purpose in your life. In the divine training ground, clarity is cultivated. When the noise of the world diminishes, when the distractions of popular opinion fade, and when the expectations of others no longer dominate your thoughts, you gain a unique clarity of purpose. You begin to hear God's voice more distinctly, to see his direction more clearly, and to align your actions more precisely with his will. This clarity is a direct result of solitude. It is in the quiet moments away from the influence of crowds that revelation and wisdom emerge. Many believers fail to understand that the ability to act decisively, lead courageously, and live purposefully is born in these periods of isolation. Standing alone is not a gap in life. It is a crucial stage in spiritual development. It trains you to discern truth from deception, to prioritize eternal significance over temporary comfort, and to rely on divine guidance above all else. The training that occurs in solitude also builds resilience. The person who stands alone must develop mental, emotional, and spiritual toughness. They must learn to trust God when circumstances are unclear, to act faithfully when others do not understand, and to persevere when the world seems opposed. Resilience is not an innate trait, it is cultivated through experience, discipline, and faith. The trials of standing alone are the very means by which resilience is forged. The criticism, misunderstanding, and opposition you encounter serve to strengthen your resolve, sharpen your character, and deepen your spiritual roots. Those who never learn to endure solitude remain vulnerable to doubt, fear, and dependence on human approval. Resilience is a prerequisite for leadership, influence, and the execution of divine purpose. Without it, even the most promising calling can falter under pressure. Another critical aspect of the divine training ground is discernment. When you are alone, you are forced to rely on God's wisdom rather than human advice. You develop the ability to distinguish between guidance that aligns with God's will and influence that is rooted in personal agenda, fear, or deception. Discernment is essential because the journey toward destiny is filled with choices, challenges, and temptations. Without discernment, you risk compromise, misdirection, and distraction. Standing alone trains you to recognize God's voice, interpret his instructions, and execute his plan with precision. It teaches you to prioritize eternal outcomes over temporary convenience, to pursue divine approval over human praise, and to remain faithful to principle over popularity. Discernment gained in solitude is a lifelong advantage. It equips you to navigate complex decisions, resist manipulation, and act with integrity in every circumstance. Standing alone in the divine training ground also develops self-reliance. This is not self-sufficiency in the worldly sense, but spiritual self-reliance grounded in faith. You learn to act decisively, pray fervently, and trust God fully without depending on human validation, resources, or support. This self-reliance is a hallmark of spiritual maturity. It allows you to operate confidently, lead effectively, and pursue purpose relentlessly. Many believers are hindered because they overdepend on others for direction, affirmation, or resources. God designed standing alone to remove these dependencies, to force you to engage with Him directly, and to demonstrate that His provision is sufficient. The independence gained through this process is not arrogance, it is empowerment. It is a recognition that divine partnership is superior to human assistance, and that faith in God produces outcomes beyond what human collaboration can achieve. In the divine training ground, patience is cultivated. The process of standing alone requires endurance, persistence, and the ability to wait on God's timing. You may not see immediate results, receive instant recognition, or experience immediate support. The world may mock, oppose, or overlook you, but the faithful who endure learn the invaluable lesson of divine timing. God's purposes are always fulfilled in His perfect schedule, and the solitary periods you endure are designed to prepare you for that fulfillment. Patience teaches you to trust, persevere, and act with faith even when outcomes are delayed. It refines your character, strengthens your resolve, and builds a foundation for long-term success. Those who cannot endure solitude often compromise, act impulsively, or abandon their calling prematurely. Standing alone trains you to endure, wait, and trust in God's perfect plan. Moreover, the divine training ground fosters humility. When you are alone, without external validation, support, or accolades, you learn to rely solely on God. Humility is not weakness, it is strength under control. It is the acknowledgement that your abilities, wisdom, and influence are gifts from God, and that your success is not self-generated. Humility allows you to remain teachable, responsive to divine instruction, and aligned with eternal principles. Standing alone teaches you that reliance on God is paramount and that human praise is secondary. This humility, forged in solitude, becomes the foundation for wise leadership, effective influence, and enduring impact. Standing alone also nurtures creativity and initiative. Without constant input, interference, or direction from others, you are compelled to innovate, strategize, and make decisions independently. This fosters original thinking, problem-solving skills, and the courage to take risks aligned with God's will. Many believers remain trapped in conformity because they fear standing alone, but those who embrace independence develop unique solutions, bold strategies, and innovative approaches that distinguish them as leaders. Creativity flourishes in solitude because it is unencumbered by external expectations or limitations. Initiative grows because responsibility cannot be deferred. The combination of creativity and initiative, honed in the divine training ground, equips you to accomplish extraordinary feats in alignment with God's purpose. Furthermore, standing alone strengthens faith. Faith is not proven in comfort, agreement, or support. It is proven in challenge, opposition, and solitude. When you stand alone, your faith is tested, refined, and solidified. You learn to trust God when circumstances appear bleak, to act boldly when the path is unclear, and to remain obedient when guidance seems distant. This deepened faith becomes the cornerstone of spiritual power, resilience, and influence. It equips you to overcome adversity, navigate uncertainty, and fulfill your divine calling with unwavering confidence. Finally, standing alone is preparation for influence. God positions those who endure the divine training ground to lead, inspire, and impact others. Their independence, resilience, discernment, patience, humility, creativity, and faith make them vessels of extraordinary power. Others may follow, not because of coercion, persuasion, or popularity, but because of the undeniable demonstration of God's strength working through a life faithfully surrendered to Him. Those who learn to stand alone emerge from the training ground ready to fulfill their destiny, equipped to navigate challenges and empowered to accomplish what others cannot. The divine training ground is a sacred space of preparation, refinement, and empowerment. Standing alone is not abandonment, failure, or weakness. It is a deliberate process through which God shapes character, cultivates faith, and prepares individuals for extraordinary purpose. The lessons learned in solitude, resilience, discernment, self-reliance, patience, humility, creativity, initiative, and faith are invaluable assets for leadership, influence, and fulfillment of divine destiny. Those who embrace the call to stand alone discover that the process, though challenging, produces strength, clarity, and authority beyond human understanding. The divine training ground is not optional for those destined for greatness. It is essential. Standing alone is the crucible in which character is forged, faith is strengthened, and destiny is confirmed. Dependence on others can limit your God-given potential. Only when you stand alone can you hear God's full instruction. Many believers live their lives tethered to the opinions, guidance, and support of others, assuming that safety, validation, and direction must always come from human sources. While fellowship, mentorship, and accountability are valuable, they are not substitutes for the direct revelation and instruction that God desires to impart to you personally. Dependence on others often becomes a barrier, a filter, or even a distortion of divine guidance. When you rely too heavily on human counsel, you risk receiving advice rooted in fear, bias, personal limitation, or worldly reasoning. These influences can subtly alter your perception, dilute your calling, or divert you from the path God has specifically prepared for you. True potential, the kind of potential that God places within you to accomplish His purpose, is unlocked only when you stand alone. In solitude, your spirit becomes a receptive vessel, unencumbered by external influence, free to receive instruction, wisdom, and revelation directly from the Creator. Standing alone is not abandonment, it is empowerment, a deliberate alignment with divine authority rather than human opinion. When you stand alone, the distractions, biases, and limitations of human influence fall away. Many believers never experience the fullness of God's instruction because they are too reliant on the voices around them. Friends, family, colleagues, and mentors, while often well-meaning, are limited in understanding the specific plan God has ordained for your life. Human insight is often confined to personal experiences, social conditioning, or immediate perception. But God's perspective is infinite, eternal. When you stand alone, you create a space where God's wisdom can flow unimpeded, where divine strategy can be received without compromise, and where your actions can align fully with His plan. Dependence on others, no matter how noble their intent, can inadvertently cloud your discernment, delay your progress, and restrain your potential. Standing alone ensures that the source of guidance is pure, unfiltered, and sovereign, rooted entirely in God's wisdom rather than the fallible reasoning of man. The limitations of dependence are often subtle but profound. When you rely excessively on human counsel, you may delay decisions until others approve, adjust your actions to match popular opinion, or compromise your convictions to gain support. These compromises, while seemingly minor, accumulate over time and erode the authenticity of your faith, the clarity of your purpose, and the integrity of your character. God's plan for your life is often unique, specific, and countercultural, which means that it may not be immediately understood, supported, or embraced by those around you. If you allow dependence on others to dictate your actions, you risk truncating the impact of your calling. Standing alone is the antidote to this limitation. It frees you to act decisively, obey faithfully, and pursue purpose without the constraints of external influence. In solitude, you discover that the guidance, wisdom, and provision you need are not contingent upon human approval. They are divinely supplied and sufficient for every challenge and opportunity. Standing alone also cultivates spiritual sensitivity. Dependence on others can dull your spiritual hearing, suppress your intuition, and hinder your ability to discern God's voice. When you rely too heavily on human instruction, your spirit may become conditioned to listen to others rather than the Spirit of God. This conditioning can lead to delayed decisions, misaligned priorities, and compromised obedience. By choosing to stand alone, you retrain your spirit to focus entirely on divine instruction. You learn to recognize the subtle promptings of the Holy Spirit, to distinguish truth from deception, and to act with confidence even when guidance appears unconventional or misunderstood. The process of standing alone sharpens your spiritual perception, ensuring that your actions are informed by heavenly wisdom rather than human preference. The liberation that comes from standing alone is profound. Many believers experience a kind of spiritual stagnation because they are tethered to the expectations, judgments, and influence of others. Their faith is constrained, their vision limited, and their courage compromised. When you stand alone, you break free from these constraints. You are no longer required to justify your actions, conform to popular belief, or seek approval before taking steps in obedience to God. This freedom is essential because it allows you to act in alignment with your God-given potential, to exercise initiative, and to fulfill your calling without compromise. Dependence may feel safe, comforting, or reassuring, but it often comes at the cost of delayed purpose, diminished potential, and missed opportunities. Standing alone positions you to operate at the highest level of divine effectiveness. Independence also fosters personal responsibility. When you stand alone, you become accountable directly to God. Your decisions, actions, and outcomes are measured against His standards, not the approval or criticism of others. This direct accountability strengthens integrity, discipline, and courage. Dependence on others can diffuse responsibility, create reliance on external validation, and encourage compromise. Standing alone ensures that your life is fully aligned with divine purpose, that your choices are deliberate, and that your influence is authentic. God entrusts those who can stand alone with responsibility because He knows they can act faithfully even without support, affirmation, or encouragement from men. Consider also the development of confidence that comes from standing alone. Many believers struggle with indecision, fear, and self-doubt because they rely excessively on the reassurance of others. Standing alone forces you to trust God's provision, act on His direction, and move forward without external affirmation. This reliance builds a confidence that is unshakable because it is rooted not in human praise, popularity, or consensus, but in divine authority and instruction. True confidence is not cultivated in conformity, it is cultivated in obedience. Those who stand alone develop a courage that enables them to face opposition, criticism, and uncertainty without wavering. Their faith becomes a demonstration of divine empowerment rather than human dependency. Standing alone also develops resilience. Dependence on others often creates vulnerability to disappointment, rejection, or conflicting opinions. When you rely on human support, the withdrawal or failure of that support can destabilize your faith, delay your progress, or diminish your courage. By learning to stand alone, you cultivate resilience, the capacity to persevere through challenges, and the strength to maintain obedience under pressure. Resilience is critical because God's purpose often requires persistence in the face of adversity. Those who cannot stand alone risk compromise, distraction, or retreat when opposition arises, whereas those who embrace independence can endure, trust, and prevail. Another dimension of standing alone is the clarity it provides for vision. Dependence on others can cloud judgment, create distractions, or introduce conflicting priorities. When you stand alone, you can evaluate situations, discern opportunities, and make decisions based on God's instruction rather than human expectation. This clarity is crucial because the fulfillment of divine purpose often involves countercultural decisions, unconventional strategies, and bold actions that may not be understood or supported by others. Standing alone allows you to act decisively, pursue divine guidance with focus, and avoid compromise that could limit your potential. It ensures that your vision remains intact, your path unaltered, and your calling unhindered. Standing alone also nurtures perseverance. Dependence can create delays as you wait for consensus, approval, or support. It can also create distraction as you navigate conflicting advice or emotional influence. By standing alone, you learn to persevere with discipline, determination, and unwavering focus. Perseverance strengthens character, builds spiritual stamina, and ensures that you can fulfill your God-given potential even when circumstances are challenging or the journey is long. Those who cannot stand alone are often subject to external pressures, which can lead to compromise, procrastination, or missed opportunities. Independence, on the other hand, allows you to persevere faithfully, respond boldly, and achieve extraordinary outcomes. Standing alone also enhances discernment in relationships. When you rely on others excessively, your choices, influence, and priorities can be subtly shaped by their beliefs, fears, or biases. Standing alone helps you recognize who truly aligns with God's purpose, who offers guidance that is sound, and who might be a source of distraction or compromise. This discernment ensures that your life, ministry, and influence are directed by divine wisdom rather than human preference. It allows you to form authentic connections, establish godly partnerships, and avoid entanglement in relationships that could limit your effectiveness or compromise your calling. The process of standing alone cultivates obedience. Dependence on others can sometimes dilute obedience, as decisions may be swayed by popular opinion, fear of rejection, or the desire to please. Standing alone requires you to obey God regardless of human expectation, approval, or understanding. This obedience, born of independence, strengthens your spiritual authority and reinforces the principle that divine instruction is paramount. It teaches you to prioritize God's will over comfort, safety, or approval, and to act with integrity even in isolation. Those who embrace this principle develop a spiritual maturity that cannot be achieved through conformity or dependence. Furthermore, standing alone builds spiritual intimacy. When you are not distracted by human influence, you can devote your heart, mind, and soul to seeking God directly. Prayer, meditation, and reflection take on a deeper significance because they are unmediated by human counsel or opinion. This intimacy cultivates a profound connection with God, an unshakable trust in His guidance, and a sensitivity to His voice. Those who stand alone are uniquely positioned to receive revelation, direction, and empowerment because their hearts are fully attuned to divine instruction. Ultimately, dependence on others can limit your potential, but standing alone unlocks it. In solitude, your faith, discernment, resilience, confidence, and obedience are strengthened. You are free to act decisively, think creatively, and pursue God's plan without compromise. Your life becomes a vessel for divine power, guidance, and impact. Those who learn to stand alone discover that God's instruction is clearer, His provision is sufficient, and His plan is unfaltering. Standing alone is not a sign of weakness. It is the pathway to realizing your God-given potential, achieving purpose, and fulfilling destiny. The world will challenge you, ridicule you, and attempt to pull you into conformity, but standing alone is your path to extraordinary purpose. From the moment you decide to follow God's instruction, you become a target for opposition, misunderstanding, and resistance. The world is designed to promote conformity, mediocrity, and compromise. It favors the ordinary, the safe, and the agreeable, while those called to extraordinary purpose often appear unusual, radical, or even threatening to the status quo. Standing alone places you outside the comfort of consensus, beyond the safety of popular opinion, and in the direct path of divine destiny. This does not mean that the path is easy. It means that it is transformative. Those who are willing to endure ridicule, rejection, and challenge are the ones who experience the full measure of God's plan. The world will question your vision, mock your convictions, and attempt to influence your choices, but the individual who stands alone is anchored in faith, guided by divine instruction, and empowered by God's presence. Standing alone is not an act of rebellion against society. It is an act of obedience to heaven. The challenge of standing alone begins with the understanding that human approval is fleeting, conditional, and often misinformed. People may applaud you when you conform, follow tradition, or behave predictably, but they often resist, criticize, or distance themselves when you act in alignment with God's unique calling. The ridicule you experience is not a reflection of failure. It is a confirmation that your life is aligned with purpose, principle, and divine vision. God's plan is rarely understood by the world at the time of its unfolding. Those who have walked in extraordinary obedience throughout history, prophets, apostles, leaders, and pioneers, often faced ridicule, isolation, and persecution before their mission was recognized, celebrated, or fully realized. To stand alone is to embrace this truth. The opinions of men do not determine the validity, authority, or impact of God's calling on your life. Standing alone also strengthens your spiritual courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act faithfully in the presence of fear, opposition, or misunderstanding. The world will attempt to intimidate you, diminish your confidence, or sway your convictions, but standing alone cultivates a courage that is rooted in faith rather than external circumstance. It is a courage that allows you to confront challenges boldly, speak truth unapologetically, and pursue your destiny relentlessly. This courage is not developed through comfort, consensus, or conformity. It is forged in isolation, tested through opposition, and validated by obedience. Every time you resist the pressure to conform, every time you choose principle over popularity, every time you remain faithful despite ridicule, you strengthen the courage required to walk the extraordinary path God has prepared for you. When you stand alone, you develop clarity of vision. The opinions, expectations, and criticisms of the world can often obscure the divine plan, creating doubt, confusion, and hesitation. Solitude and independence remove these distractions, allowing you to focus on God's purpose with precision. You gain insight into the timing, strategy, and direction that align with His plan. Clarity of vision is essential because the pursuit of extraordinary purpose often requires unconventional decisions, bold action, and the willingness to challenge the norm. Those who are dependent on the affirmation of others may hesitate, compromise, or delay, but those who stand alone act decisively and faithfully. Clarity gained in solitude ensures that every step you take, every decision you make, and every word you speak aligns with the divine strategy for your life. Standing alone also teaches perseverance. The world may attempt to discourage, distract, or derail you, but perseverance is the spiritual muscle that sustains you in the face of opposition. Dependence on human support often limits endurance because external validation fluctuates, resources waver, and encouragement can be inconsistent. The person who stands alone relies on God's strength, finds sustenance in His word, and draws courage from His presence. Every challenge, every critique, and every moment of isolation is an opportunity to strengthen perseverance. Perseverance is not passive endurance. It is active faith in action. It is the commitment to move forward, obey, and act even when circumstances are unfavorable, misunderstood, or opposed. Those who learn to persevere alone are prepared for the extraordinary purpose God has designed, able to withstand trials, and equipped to complete the mission without compromise. Standing alone cultivates integrity. When you are removed from the influence of human expectation, it becomes impossible to justify compromise for the sake of approval. You are no longer constrained by the desire to please others, avoid criticism, or gain popularity. Integrity becomes your default mode, obedience becomes your habit, and faithfulness becomes your testimony. The world may attempt to tempt you with shortcuts, persuade you toward compromise, or ridicule your adherence to principle, but those who stand alone remain steadfast. Integrity, nurtured in solitude, becomes the foundation for leadership, influence, and lasting impact. It ensures that your decisions, actions, and influence are aligned with God's standard rather than the transient opinions of men. Independence also produces creativity and innovation. When you are not bound by conventional thinking, popular trends, or human expectations, you are free to explore new ideas, implement bold strategies, and execute unconventional solutions that align with God's unique purpose for your life. Creativity is the product of freedom. Innovation is the fruit of courage. The world often resists originality because it challenges the familiar, but those who stand alone harness divine insight to create solutions, inspire others, and accomplish feats beyond ordinary imagination. Independence provides the latitude to act decisively, think boldly, and innovate courageously, all in alignment with God's extraordinary plan. Standing alone also produces spiritual maturity. When the world challenges you, ridicules you, or attempts to influence your choices, your faith is tested and refined. Maturity is not developed in comfort, conformity, or consensus. It is developed in obedience, solitude, and reliance on God's wisdom. The trials, misunderstandings, and opposition that accompany independence teach patience, discernment, and resilience. Spiritual maturity ensures that when opportunity arises, when responsibility is entrusted, or when influence is required, you are fully prepared to respond with wisdom, courage, and authority. Those who embrace solitude and stand alone become vessels capable of extraordinary impact, able to navigate complexity, opposition, and challenge without compromise. Furthermore, standing alone fosters deep intimacy with God. The world may offer companionship, agreement, or encouragement, but it cannot provide the personal, unmediated relationship with God that develops in solitude. When you stand alone, your prayers become more earnest, your worship more sincere, and your obedience more deliberate. Intimacy with God allows you to hear His voice clearly, discern His plan accurately, and act faithfully regardless of external circumstances. The extraordinary purpose God has for your life requires a depth of relationship, clarity of instruction, and courage of conviction that can only be cultivated in communion with Him. Independence ensures that your connection with God is unshakable, unfiltered, and unyielding. Standing alone also strengthens influence. Those who attempt to follow the crowd, seek approval, or conform are often constrained by collective limitations. But those who stand alone, guided solely by divine instruction, operate with authority, clarity, and impact that others cannot replicate. Influence is not measured by numbers, popularity, or human validation. It is measured by obedience, principle, and alignment with God's purpose. Those who embrace independence become models of courage, integrity, and faithfulness. Their lives inspire, their actions impact, and their presence commands attention, not because they seek it, but because divine authority flows through their obedience. The ultimate reward of standing alone is the fulfillment of extraordinary purpose. God does not call you to mediocrity. He calls you to influence, impact, and authority. The world will attempt to discourage, ridicule, or oppose, but the one who stands alone emerges victorious, equipped, and empowered. Every challenge, every misunderstanding, every moment of isolation is a building block for the extraordinary life God has designed. Those who embrace solitude, resist conformity, and obey faithfully are positioned to achieve feats that